So good evening. I'm going to welcome all of those who have tuned in online to join this broadcast just now. Again, I'm Damon Wilson, the President and CEO of the National Endowment for Democracy, America's Foundation for Freedom and Democracy. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to the formal part of our award ceremony today, the Endowment's 2021 Democracy Award. For those that are following on social media, on Facebook, on Twitter, please join in that conversation. Use our hashtag DemAward and EdNedDemocracy. At the Endowment, our work is about what you just heard. It's about what happens on the front lines of freedom. We have a historic, indeed an urgent mission as we work to help the grassroots activists on the front lines end this ongoing democratic recession and usher in a democratic renewal. Our work is to stand by those who struggle for democracy and human rights and to stand up to those who try to stop them. We honor and admire their courage, their resilience, and their sacrifice. And that's why we're gathered this evening, to celebrate those who persevere in the face of obstruction, intimidation, and threats. So this year's Democracy Award honors the work of 4 courageous civil society groups who are working to confront the crisis of democracy in a region so close to our own, Central America. The Myrna Mack Foundation from Guatemala, tackling cycles of impunity. The Human Rights Collective, Nicaragua, Nunca Más, searching for justice for victims of state violence. Contracorriente of Honduras, working to expose injustices through investigative journalism. And Tracora of El Salvador, that's using data and transparency to advance the rule of law. These 4 outstanding organizations represent a larger effort at the grassroots across the region to address critical issues of governance, accountability, and human rights that are so fundamental to the struggle for democracy, justice, and human dignity in the region. But in a sea of bad news, they represent good news. They represent the pathway forward for the region. So tonight we celebrate them. Tonight's an expression of solidarity and support. And tonight we recognize the extraordinary resilience of Democrats who inspire our team each and every day in our own work. So to kick off this event, I'm delighted to introduce and welcome to the stage Ken Wallach, who's the chairman of the board of directors of the National Endowment for Democracy. He's one of the reasons I'm so proud to have joined the endowment under his board leadership. Ken is also the co-chair of the Commission of Presidential Debates, a member of the Advisory Committee for USAID, and for more than 25 years, he served as president of the National Democratic Institute, one of our 4 core institutes. He has been a terrific partner. Ken, please, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Damon. I am very proud to be part of this ceremony, which in itself represents the mission of the endowment. That is democratic solidarity. And that solidarity is also symbolized by the award itself. This small-scale replica of the goddess of democracy that was constructed in Tiananmen Square during the student movement for freedom and democracy in 1989. The original statue was created by art students from the Central Academy of Art in Beijing and by democracy demonstrators. It was unveiled in Tiananmen Square on May 30th, 1989. And during the government crackdown 5 days later, the statue was destroyed by a tank, an unforgettable moment that was witnessed throughout the world. San Francisco sculptor Thomas Marsh led a project to recreate a 10-foot bronze replica of the original goddess of democracy with the help of Chinese students. The bronze replica was unveiled in 1994 by Chinese dissidents and Speaker Nancy Pelosi in San Francisco. Later, Marsh created smaller replicas of the statue to recognize those around the world who have made contributions to the movement for democracy. And we are very grateful to Tom Marsh for his support of this effort. With that, I am privileged to introduce our keynote speaker, Senator Tim Kaine, who represents Virginia in the U.S. Senate, where he holds seats on the Foreign Relations and Armed Services Committees. He chairs the Foreign Relations Subcommittee on Western Hemisphere, Transitional Crime, Civilian Security, Democracy, Human Rights, and Global Women's Issues, all pressing issues for our awardees this evening. Closer to this home, he also serves as an honorary board member of the Endowment. He began his career in public service in local politics as a member of the Richmond City Council. His former Senate colleague, Barbara Mikulski, a one-time council member in nearby Baltimore, once boasted that in this country, we do not arrest our dissidents. We send them to city council. Senator Kaine rose in state politics, becoming lieutenant governor, and then nationally as U.S. Senator, chairman of the Democratic Party, and vice presidential candidate. Senator Kaine never lost his affinity for Central America. After graduating from college, he ran a technical school founded by Jesuit missionaries in Honduras, where he trained teenagers in carpentry and welding. It was there that he formed his core values that guide him today: fe, familia, y trabajo, faith, family, and work. Senator, we are so pleased to welcome you to the NED for this occasion as we honor our 4 Central American partners for their courageous work in Guatemala, El Salvador, Nicaragua, and Honduras. Senator.
Well, thank you, Ken, y bienvenidos a todos. It is such an honor to be here at this organization. I care very, very much about the organization, but I am particularly just inspired by the fact that you would recognize in this year's awards brave NGOs, brave leaders in a part of the world I care very deeply about, but which needs sustained U.S. involvement and engagement and often does not get it. So thank you for recognizing these 4 powerful and meaningful organizations in Honduras, Nicaragua, El Salvador, and Guatemala. As Ken mentioned, my public service career actually did not start on city council. It started when I was at Harvard Law School, and I noticed everyone around me was excited about maybe going to Wall Street and making a lot of money. And I knew that's not what I wanted to do. But because I didn't know any lawyers, I didn't know what it was that I wanted to do. And so I decided to take a year off in the middle of law school and connect with Jesuit missionaries who, at that point, were missionaries in the Missouri province. And Missouri province Jesuits had been asked in the 1950s to sort of lend some of their members to the Yoro province in Honduras, along with Spanish missionaries, Gallegos from Galicia. And so in the Yoro province, one of the provinces in Honduras, most of the priestly functions at churches and medical clinics and schools were done by Jesuits, either from the Missouri province or Galicia. I went there and said, I would love to just volunteer for a year. And they said, what do you do? I said, I'm at Harvard Law School. They said, that's precisely worthless. I said, my dad is a welder. Now, okay, now we can talk. They had just started a school, the Instituto Técnico Loyola, and they needed a director because the director was leaving to go to Panama to continue studies for the priesthood. And so I had a 1-month immersion experience with the previous director. He left, and then I ran the school for the rest of the year. Let me tell you about Honduras in 1980 and 81. It was a military dictatorship. The Jesuits I worked with were persona non grata because they were fighting very, very hard for lo demás, the least of these. A Jesuit that I knew, Guadalupe Kaine from St. Louis, was murdered by the Honduran military a few years after I left. I met a number of Jesuits who came to El Progreso, where I lived, to participate in retreats. Some of them were later murder victims at the University of Central America in San Salvador in the late 1980s. The Jesuits at that time and today, in places all around the world, were deeply engaged in social justice activities as a matter of faith, and yet were being persecuted because they were standing up for people who didn't have anyone else to stand up for them. It wasn't that different in Guatemala and El Salvador. Civil wars were going on that were killing thousands and thousands of people a year, mostly poor people, mostly indigenous people. In Nicaragua, the regime of the Somoza family had been toppled by a new Sandinista government, but the United States was already amassing troops on the southern border of Honduras and into Nicaragua to try to destabilize that brand new government. That was a very formative experience for a naive young person from Kansas City who had just been a college student to go into that environment. And it felt a little bit dangerous at times. Here's something that makes me sad. I've gone back to Honduras a number of times over the years. Jennifer, one of the award recipients who started Contra Corriente, ella trabajó in Radio Progreso, the Jesuit radio station. And I used to live with all the people that ran Radio Progreso, and they'd get a call in the middle of the night that somebody had bombed their transmitter, and the guy would pick up his toolkit to go down and try to get it started up again. As fearful as I occasionally felt, and being around others who were afraid as well, I think it might be worse today. I think it might be worse today. I think Nicaragua could well be worse today in some ways. I think, thank God, the civil wars in Guatemala and El Salvador are over, but there's still huge, huge challenges. We would like to believe that things get better, that things get better in a year or 10 years or 20 years or 30 years, but there are parts of the world, including Central America right now, where the evidence is not necessarily pointing in the direction of things are improving. There has been a democratic retrenchment in this part of the world. And let's be honest, we can't be holier than thou about it in the United States because we've seen democratic backsliding here as well. And other parts of the world have seen democratic backsliding. And that's why NED is so necessary. Democracies are in need of love today. Democracies are in need of work today. We sometimes spend time on my committees, Armed Services and Foreign Relations, thinking about our adversaries. We need to think more about our democratic allies and tackle the ailments that are afflicting the democracies of the world and do that together. Why have things backslid? That would take way too long. And there's so many reasons, and there's so many challenges and causes, but let me just focus on things that we in the United States can do better. Our attention to the Americas is episodic only. And if we're going to be honest about American foreign policy, American engagement with the world, what we would have to say is this: most administrations, Democratic and Republican, most secretaries of state, they know the world has an east-west axis because they fly east and west all the time, but they don't fly south very much. The proportion of time that we devote to nations to our south, either in the Americas or in Africa, are just dwarfed by the time and attention that we spend going east and west. Europe, Russia, China, the Middle East, Japan. We don't spend the attention that we need to on the Americas in particular, and we're all Americans. We all name ourselves after this super overachiever, Americo Vespucci. What guy got 2 continents named after him? We all call ourselves Americans, North, Central, or South. We're deeply connected, and yet the U.S. attention to the Americas has been extremely episodic. If there's a challenge at the southern border, we get interested for a while, but then our attention fades. And often when we pay attention, it's not even really about the Americas. The Monroe Doctrine was about the Americas, sort of, but it was really to try to keep Europe from engaging with the Americas. It was more focused on Europe. During the Cold War, we did some things in the Americas, but it was more about the Soviet Union than it was about the Americas. And so one of the things I try to do in the Senate, and especially now that I've recently become the chairman of the committee overseeing the Western Hemisphere, is I'm trying to convince the Biden administration, and with colleagues, I recently took 6, 3 from each party, to 4 nations in the Americas. I'm trying to have a more continuous, consistent, permanent engagement with our brothers and sisters who all call ourselves Americans. And we need to do that. The other thing that America needs to do is we need to be more consistent in the Americas. Not just consistent in our presence, but consistent in our values and approaches. Here's one example. We very much want the Organization for American States to be strong and to play an important role. And we're happy when the OAS shows that they're willing to stand up and take a tough stance, for example, against the atrocities going on in Venezuela and try to call for a better chapter in the future of Venezuela. And we're glad when they do that. But when the OAS stood up after the re-election of the current Honduran president and said the election was so fundamentally flawed that it should be rerun, Washington officials didn't stand up for the OAS then. Instead, Washington officialdom just recognized the new government. And what did that new government do? The president of Honduras is implicated in multiple criminal cases in the United States for being involved in drug trafficking into the United States. And so we not only need to be present, but we also need to be consistent. If we're going to speak up against human rights, it shouldn't matter whether the government we're speaking up calls itself socialist or communist or capitalist or authoritarian. Is it a government of the right? Is it a government of the left? I hate corruption. I hate dictators. We need to be consistent in our approaches in the Americas if we are to be respected. The last thing I'll say before I get to the important point, which is these honorees, is we also need to acknowledge as Americans that a lot of the pain in the Americas, and especially in the Northern Triangle, is very connected to us in this country. As I watch accountings of, the crisis at the border, people coming to America's southwest border, there's often a little bit of an attitude like, how dare they? Why are they coming here? Why would they do that? Their pain is connected to our pain. The pain of people living in the Northern Triangle is connected to Americans' pain. The American pain that drives Americans to spend billions and billions or trillions to buy drugs, to buy illegal drugs, to deal with whatever pain they're feeling in their own life, that pain inflicts massive pain on the countries in the Northern Triangle. Poor countries without a lot of income, if Americans are willing to send a lot of cash south to get drugs transited through those countries, it corrupts institutions, it corrupts the police, it corrupts governments, it corrupts representative bodies, it corrupts prosecutors' offices. It leads to gangs fighting over turf, which cause inocentes to lose their lives and lose their hope. And so when we wonder why people come to the border, we can't act like we can put up a wall, no matter, it could be 1,000,000 feet high. We're still connected. We are still connected. And we have responsibilities to acknowledge that and then work in tandem with our American brothers and sisters in the Northern Triangle to find solutions together. But it's hard. How do we as a United States, a Senate, a Biden administration, how do we meaningfully play a role where we're more permanently engaged and we're more consistent in our values and we're acknowledging that our problems are often connected? How do we do that with unreliable partners? And sadly, so many of the governments have been completely unreliable partners. And we could invest $1 billion or 10 billion or 100 billion. If you invest in an unreliable partner, you're not going to get the result. You're not going to get the improvement in people's daily lives that you want to. Well, that's why these 4 organizations are so important. If we are to be more engaged and if we're to be more consistent, we have to have partners on the ground, and there are no better partners than NGOs that are standing up and being courageous, just like the Jesuits I worked with now more than 4 decades ago. And you have in these 4 NGOs that Ned is representing tonight, great examples of just small, grassroots, humble, but powerful and motivated and courageous leaders. And if you invest in leaders like that or organizations like that, it is the most likely path that we are going to have to be successful in finding our American brothers and sisters forging their own paths to futures where they don't have to export their young people to other countries, but their young people can live in their neighborhoods near their families and friends and have opportunities. So again, I'll finish where I started. I'm so happy that Ned decided to recognize these organizations who are doing such good work on a part of the world that's so very important and so connected to us. And I'll close just with the beautiful prayer that we used to always say at mealtime when I was in Honduras. And the prayer was this. Some of you might have heard it. Dios da pan a los que tienen hambre y hambre para justicia a los que tienen pan. Lord, give bread to those who hunger and hunger for justice to those who have bread. These organizations have that hunger for justice. And Ned's decision to spotlight them and honor them and invest in them is a path we can pursue with confidence because of the kind of people and organizations these are. Thank you for letting me come and share with you tonight. And felicitaciones a todos por su trabajo tan importante en esos países preciosos. Gracias.